Here. My name is Sheldon Nord. I'm the president of Corban University, and I welcome you to our chapel service this morning. Here in the power of Christ I stand. That's a great song, one of my favorites. Portland native Duncan Campbell graduated from the University of Oregon School of Law in 1973. He is now a successful entrepreneur, the founder and chairman of the Campbell Group, a preeminent timberland investment firm, as well as the founder of Friends of the Children, a nonprofit organization that supports, advocates for, and invests in Oregon's poor and disadvantaged children and teenagers. Duncan is also the recipient of the 2012 Portland First Citizen Award, among many other awards, an award that honors civic achievement and business leadership. I met Duncan about probably a year and a half ago through my brother-in-law, Paul Rollins, and have gotten to know him. We traveled to Indonesia together for about 10 days last May and June. We played golf a little bit together. We've shared some of the things that we love reading and doing in life, and he agreed.
And we went dancing together.
And we went dancing together.
Not you and
Duncan
I,
promised me he would not make me look bad today, so... So please welcome Duncan Campbell to our chapel. We decided to take a little bit different approach today. Instead of having somebody speak to you, I'm going to interview Duncan. I call him Dunk, with his permission.
Is it Dunk the Skunk or just Dunk?
So I'm going to start us out, starting out talking a little bit about his childhood. Duncan vividly remembers getting picked up by the police at the age of 3 in the middle of the night while he searched for his parents. The cops found his mom and dad in the bar. So Dunk, tell us a little bit about your childhood and even what happened at age 8 there.
Well, first off, I just want to share how touched I was by the music. You probably, it's become somewhat of a routine, but I wish that the church I go to sang with the enthusiasm and spirit that you do as students. I just was genuinely touched, not only with the words and the content, but just the spirit at which you sang, which is the same thing we found actually when we went to Indonesia together. It was pretty amazing. The spirit there was beyond what you see in most churches in America, so thank you for that. And while I'm going to start with kind of a challenging childhood, normally I'm lighter and brighter than that, but right. I share this with you really in the spirit of, I have a feeling that most people don't share enough, especially most men, and they don't share the reality of their life and then give you hope and promise in light of whatever your childhood or challenges that you've had. So in a simple form and basics, I grew up in North Portland in what would be known as a welfare family. Both of my parents were alcoholics. My dad was in prison twice. We literally lived in bars and taverns. So when I was a little boy, you could still go into taverns and bars. So my parents actually spent a good part of their non-working life in bars, and I'd go in and everybody would, be nice to me and spoil me. But later on, you couldn't go in bars any longer. So then I'd sit out in the car for hours, just be left alone. And then when I wasn't sitting out in the car, I'd be home alone. And that was the premise of the story, that when I was 3, I'm literally wandering down the streets with my pants on inside out, and a guy's smoking a cigarette at a bakery on a corner and sees this little kid come down the street. And obviously I'm, wandering, and so I'm looking for my parents, and he calls the police who knew my parents already, and then they went and found him in the bar, and we went home.
So something happened there at age 8 that was kind of significant in your life.
Yeah, later on I'm going to talk about Friends of the Children and my passion and why I cared so much. But when I was younger, once again, I had a father, but unfortunately he was rarely around, and then when he went into prison he obviously wasn't around. But then again, when I'm 8 years old, and you can go back, just think of yourself at 8 years old, and what were the good things and what were the challenging things. But I was going to be inducted into the Cub Scouts, but you had to have a parent there. So I'm sitting in the front row here, and they do a little program, and then they call you forward, but you couldn't come unless your father was there. Well, my father wasn't there in the beginning. He didn't show up in time, and so I sat down, and and at 8 you're pretty embarrassed and ashamed, but it got worse. So they finished the ceremony. I don't get sworn in. I'm all embarrassed. I start walking up the aisle, and lo and behold, here comes my dad in the back door, dead drunk, staggering. "Oh, come on, we can get you, son." And I'm just bawling like a baby and run off. And I just share that with you in the spirit of that's reality for some children. And there's even things worse. I mean, that's not the worst thing in the world, and other things happen. But it just gives you a sense of what happens when a young child is neglected, and then what that leads to later in life.
So one of the things that Duncan promised himself, if he ever became wealthy, he would use his money to throw a lifeline to impoverished, abused, neglected, and otherwise hopeless kids. In 1993, he turned over the day-to-day management of his firm, the Campbell Group, and he founded and created Friends of the Children, an organization that matches committed mentors with kids. These are actually paid mentors, and we've had several Corban alum be some of those first mentors, actually, I think, back in the early 90s. So Duncan, tell us a little bit more about Friends of the Children.
Well, given my childhood, people always say, why did I even create it? Well, for 30 years after I turned 21 or so, I was at what's known as a child advocate. And so I was on the Juvenile Commission and a governor's task force, and et cetera. So I go to meetings and conferences, and people would talk about doing this, and they'd talk about doing that and making change. And nothing ever changed. And then I looked back on my childhood, and then I said, well, if I really wanted to change a child's life, that we were in similar circumstances or even worse, the least of them, what would I do? And so what I decided to do was do something that had never been done before. And my definition of creativity, by the way, is you take existing things and rearrange them in a way that's never been done. So the 5 things I'm going to share with you are nothing new, but then nobody had ever done them together in the same place. And Friends was based on these 5 premises. If I really wanted to change a child's life, what would I do? First off, you got to start early. So we start at the end of kindergarten. Though these children have probably lost hope, and their behaviors are pretty close to way outside the circle, they're still malleable. I think it's very difficult to change a teenager who's established values, principles, and behaviors. That's another thing we can talk about another day. The second thing is, if you really want to change them, you got to make a long-term commitment. So we start at the end of kindergarten with these children and stay with them all the way through high school, 12 years. Most mentoring organizations, which I love, stay 6 to 9 months on average. 6 to 12 months, and the average mentor stays 9 months. So these children are so challenging that most of them wouldn't have the initiative to get in a mentoring program like Big Brothers Big Sisters, and if they got in, they probably couldn't last past the 2nd or 3rd visit, and I'll tell you why. And then third is we take the most seriously at-risk children. So go back to when you were in grade school or high school and you're picking teams, and who the first captain, second choose. Well, we do the opposite of that. We don't pick the best athlete or the best child and then work our way up. We actually do the reverse of like the NFL draft or the NBA draft. We go into a grade school and say there's 100 kindergarten kids, and we say, we don't use this language, so excuse me for a moment. Well, if we don't use it, I shouldn't say it, should I? But we just imagine the worst kid in your grade school, okay? That's who we pick. We want the worst kid. And then we want the second worst, the third worst. Actually, a teacher snuck in a good kid on us one year, and he said, this kid has such a horrible family life, but that little kid had resilience, was tenacious, and was bright. But we don't pick those. We pick those who are actively fighting, swearing at teachers, sitting back in the back of the classroom dirty, isolated, alone, or the one who's inappropriately clinging to the teacher all the time because they're striving for affection. And those are the children, the least of them, that we pick. And then it's all about a one-on-one relationship. If you have for example, if you didn't know, most caseworkers have 75 to 100 clients. We just call our children children. We don't use any professional terms. And it's all about the one-on-one relationship. And the other difference is the friend is a mentor, but they're paid a livable wage. So we're competitive. We pay above average in the social service market, but we can't compete with business or anything. But they're paid a livable wage. And the amazing thing is most social workers stay in positions 2 years, especially early on. And in Friends, the Friends have not only stayed on average 8 years, we now have a dozen of them that have stayed 19 years and have gone through the second cycle of children.
So a mentor gets a full-time salary, and how many children are they mentoring?
Yeah, and that's the other unique thing. If you want to have a genuine relationship with a child, you've got to really spend the time with them. So the Friend only has 8 children. So, and there's a golden rule that if they want to know what they're supposed to be doing, they're supposed to be with the child. And so they spend 4 hours a week, usually twice a week, say an hour one time in school or right after school, another time 3 hours on an outing or doing homework or going for a walk or literally doing nothing, just hanging out. But once again, they got 12 years to be with this child. And so it's very unique in terms of the intimacy. That's more time than most parents spend with their children in America.
I think you shared with me that you now have one of the children, or maybe more than one, at least one that has gone through as a child, coming out of that is now a mentor. Is there more than one of those, or? Oh,
no, that we all cry. It's amazing. The first time we introduced her, not only to the board, but later on at a fundraising event. I mean, literally almost everybody in the room's crying. And the minimum, they're all choked up. You can imagine a child coming out of these circumstances, and I'll share something in a minute in terms of outcomes, but to go all the way through college, and then she worked for 3 years at a college like this, and then came back to be a Friend. It's pretty touching. And in terms of the reality, though, this is probably the most important part. I come from a business, legal background, so I'm all about outcomes. And the most powerful thing, if I leave one message with you different than what I've already shared, that is that Friends is real. Friends works. And you see that in the outcomes. So when I started it, it was just an idea, right? How did I know if it was going to work or not? But after 5 years, we could tell it was going to change these children's lives. So here's what's happened in the time we've done it. I don't want to get too far ahead. We'll come back a little bit. But 85% of these children graduate from high school. Their cohort group is 30%. So when you see all these things about dropouts and everything, and these are the children that we're going to drop out, 70% of them. And once again, we have a graduation rate of high school. I mean, we just want them to become good. I'm going to simplify it. It's much more complex than this. We want them to become good people, good citizens. And then the other thing is 96% of them stay out of the justice system. Their cohort group would be 35%. So you can see the radical change it makes in terms of all the costs of being in that system. And then the last thing is 98% of them do not become early parents. 60% of them came from single teen mothers. And nobody wants to talk about it, but it's intergenerational, a number of behaviors. And one thing I'll just throw in, because I didn't mention it and it may not come up, Well, I went to law school for 3 years is another topic. I went to law school for 3 times. I hated it. I quit 3 times. I finished law school. I became a lawyer, which is another story. But the point of that is I worked at the juvenile court in Portland for 2 years, full-time at JDH, or the Donnelly Long Home. I loved it. I couldn't believe I got paid to do it. But then I went back to law school for another complex reason. But then I worked 2 more years at Skipworth in Eugene in detention part-time while I was going to law school. Once again, I loved it. Couldn't believe it. I got paid for it. But the point of that is it was another reason I started Friends. My childhood, working at the court, most of the young people that came through the detention court never needed to be there. I mean, obviously the answer is a great parent, which most of you are probably fortunate to have. But if you don't have a great parent, you need a loving, caring, nurturing relationship.
So, Dunk, you're an accountant. You have a law degree. You have the Campbell Group, and it's worth, I mean, you have a multi-billion-dollar company, and yet you're known for children.
I'm the luckiest guy alive. Yeah.
Tell us about your experience of coming to Christ.
Before that, let me just share one thing. Don't let me forget that question.
Okay, I won't.
I recognizing my childhood, if I would talk about it in terms of how I came to Christ, but I wouldn't trade my childhood for anything. I mean, the way I put it is I would want no child to have that childhood, and that's why I created Friends. And yet, God gave me that childhood. And then later on, when I was fortunately successful in business, God made that possible. Now, when you'll hear in my testimony, of course, I thought everything I achieved early on, I made happen. But I'm real clear that anything good that came to me came from the Lord, unequivocally, no doubt about it. And later on, when I loved being an entrepreneur, but I loved being a social entrepreneur. And when I say I'm the luckiest guy alive, I mean, doing Friends, I love business. I mean, I love the challenge, etc. But this is 1,000-fold. And I say that to encourage you in your calling and your individual path. I was put on earth, I'm clear, to be a friend. Unfortunately, it didn't exist, right? So I had to make it. But I get to go in, every day now and be with the children and help it grow, etc. But that's what I mean when I'm the luckiest guy alive. I am so fortunate in terms of being able to be around and with. When you meet the Friends, they're amazing young people, most of them, and about 25% of them are 50 and older. But most of them are 21 to 35, and it's just electric to be around in the spirit of Friends. If you ever come visit us in Portland, you'll get a sense of that. So come back to my...
So are you always looking for new friends?
Yeah. Actually,
Because we have great students who...
Yeah. Well, we've had a number of Corban people be friends.
Yeah.
Actually, one of our very first friends was a star basketball player here many years ago. Friends was started 20 years ago. His name was Zach Harris. And we've had a note, and he was Western Baptist still then. But we're always looking for friends. So if you have this calling to work with children, to be with children, and you really want to make a difference and really change a life, come see us at Friends, because we're looking for friends all the time. We normally hire in the spring, but friends come and go. And so give us some thought.
Yeah. For those of you who are faculty here that may have been around for a while, Zach Harris, Steve Adams, Ulf Spears, Cornelius Williams, I think all of them have worked with Duncan at one time or another. So some familiar names to us. So yeah, let's go back to kind of your experience of coming to Christ.
Sure. I assume most of you know Christ, but you can share this with your friends, or if you're struggling with your faith. This is just a different experience that most people have. So go back to my childhood again, and just imagine me being 8 years old again, close to the time of the Cub Scout story. I'm 8 years old. I get up on Sunday morning, go get my friend Clifford, about 4 blocks away. Then we walk a block to the Baptist church. Now, what 8-year-old wants to get up and go to church, let alone get up, go get his friend, and go to church? Well, a pretty lonely child, for sure. And I didn't know Christ, and but I end up going to church. And to make a long story short, I actually went for 4 or 5 years, became president of the Baptist Youth Fellowship, but I never knew Christ. And then later on in high school, a friend of mine came alongside of me, tried to get me to go to church. So I went to church with him, and I still remember going to church with him the second time, and we're in the back of the church, and his friend says, "Come on, let's go outside." So we go outside, and they want to go across the street to Safeway and shoplift some stuff. And I thought, well, where's God in that? I guess I'm a little confused. And so to make a longer story short, I go into my college years and basically became an atheist. I read a lot of, for those of you who have ever read Ayn Rand, who's an atheist, I followed that type of thinking, an individualist, and you had to make it on your own, etc. And but later, then I reached this kind of midlife time, and I thought I was wise. I didn't believe there was a God, but I did believe that maybe there was a God, but I didn't think so, so I was an agnostic. And then one day, I'm sitting around, I'd actually been drinking. I had a couple of drinks, and it came up about going to this Bible study, and I said, "Oh, that's a big crutch." Every argument you've ever heard against whether there's a God, let alone having a relationship with Christ. And yet, by the end of that evening, I told this guy I would come to the weekly Bible study. And I'd always been curious. When I was young, there's a book called The Greatest Story Ever Told, which is a novel form. And I'd read that as a teenager. But once again, I was never touched by the Holy Spirit. And I have a unique type of conversion. Some people, they have the foxhole conversion, or all of a sudden they're in crisis. But what happened for me is at the same time, another friend invited me to go to church. And I started going to this church, and I love the music and worship, but I love the teaching, because the teacher used the Bible but talked about where you really were. And if you're not relating to the Bible where you really live and have to deal with every day. And at the end of 2-year period between these experiences, I actually went to the men's retreat before I knew Christ. And but I loved the fellowship. And then at the end of 2 years, 2 friends, one of them said, "Well, you've come to Christ." And this other guy says, "No, you haven't." So I got together with my pastor at breakfast, and I told him this challenge. I said, "Here are these 2 people." And he said, "Oh, there's an easy answer to that." He says, "It's clear you've come to Christ. You're like somebody who's fallen in love. You just haven't gotten married yet." And without going into detail, if anybody ever wants to ask me, I'm glad to share the details of how every one of the arguments over that 2-year period that the ones you read about everywhere, they all fell away one by one. And then the most poignant moment in all of that, I didn't hear a voice or anything, but God said to me, He said, "It doesn't make any difference what one other person on earth does. It's my personal relationship with you." So if people use the Holocaust or the cruelty or my childhood or anything, he says that we all face challenges in life, and I don't know the answer to that one. I don't think any of us do, but we know that it's part of our walk. And that was the tipping point, and then that's basically how I came to Christ.
Thank you. Jamie and I had dinner with you and Cindy and Doug and Riss. Maddie, call you out there a little bit. 6 of us had dinner together Monday night of this week, so it was the first time I met Cindy. Tell me a little bit about, that's his wife. Tell us a little bit about Cindy and your children, your family.
Well, people like Sheldon.
You married up, by the way.
People, I know that. You stole my line. Everybody says I married up. And,
You were going to say that about me, weren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
that's true.
It's true. But to go back to that dinner where, I had a couple of drinks and actually, talking about going to this Bible study. Well, actually, my wife, Cindy, was already going to it. And I was kind of on her. I mean, I would classically say I wasn't very nice. I mean, I wasn't real bad, but I wasn't very nice. And yet, Cindy and I have been married, I thought it was 35 years. She said it was 38 or something. And we've got 3 children. I have my youngest son, Courtney, does documentaries on social injustices. He just finished one on human trafficking around the World Cup, and was blessed. He was in 4 film festivals, and he's probably one of the sweetest people you'll ever want to meet. And he just got married to a girl named Courtney. So we call him Courtney Squared. And then she takes his name, so they're both Courtney Campbell. So you can imagine the phone calls they're going to get. And my daughter, Annie, was all spirit, and she's a pistol and a rascal and not very nice between the ages of 12 and 15. But she became an actress, and she did quite well as an actress. She was on a number of TV shows I could mention, etc., and a movie. But she never broke through. She made a good living if she lived in Portland, but she didn't make enough to live in LA. And then she called it a day, and then she supported herself by doing catering, and then fortunately grew a pretty successful catering business. And she's now pregnant with our first grandchild from her, and she's due in February. And then I have an older son, Jeff, lives in West Lynn, and I have 2 grandchildren, 9 and 12, and they look like little Campbell soup kids, literally. So, yeah.
That's appropriate.
Yeah.
So what 3 or 4 or 5 pieces of advice do you have for Corban students as they think about graduation, they think about getting a job, having a career, following their passions? Do you have any advice?
Yeah. Let me end with the career and the passion, but let me just share. For those of you, I don't know how many of you are married, but for those, the father speaks at the dinner, the rehearsal dinner. And I had one of the greatest gifts I ever received was from my youngest son. And he said, will you share with me the lessons that you learned in business? And I think about them all the time, but I'd never written them down, let alone shared them, in an organized way. So I did. I made the list, and we had a long lunch, and I had a wonderful conversation. But I was just so touched that he wanted to know without me saying, hey, you need to learn this, and you need to learn that. But the early ones have to do just with life. And so at my same son's wedding, I said I was going to share some of what I call the Campbell family things. And I'll share just 3 of them with you. The first one is the Campbells tell each other they love each other. And you don't do it in an artificial way, but you intentionally, from time to time, tell each other that you love them. Now, you can say, like, goodbye on the phone, love you. I mean, we all now have kind of that habit, love you. And if you're angry, you probably don't say it. But on the other hand, you genuinely tell each other, assuming that you do love one another, that we love each other. I think every human being, it goes back to the children and friends, every human being and everybody in this room, I believe, wants to be loved and to love somebody. I think it's the nature of all of us. And the second one is, and this will be true as you go in, especially into a challenging marketplace. You're coming out in a unique time in history to work in time. And the Campbells fix it. Oh, excuse me, take that back. It's number 3 is related to going to work. And I'm going to jump ahead then and do that one. And that is, Campbells don't quit. I mean, you're going to find it harder than you think, I think, coming out in terms of work and you just got to be tenacious. Some of you are pretty bright and gifted and well prepared and have experience, and you won't have any trouble. But today's world, you got to be thinking options. You just don't go at one thing. You've got to be thinking, go after 3 or 4 different things, see how it evolves, but just be tenacious and don't quit. And most people quit after the first challenging experience. Psychology has proved that. But it's going to take for everybody 2 or 3. I mean, the greatest gift of entrepreneurs is actually they don't quit. Michael Jordan says, they say, why are you one of the greatest ever? And he doesn't talk about his ability or anything. He says, I just don't quit. And so that you can quit after a reasonable time and after a reasonable effort. I don't want anybody to beat their head against the wall or just hang in there till it doesn't make any sense. But I just would say be tenacious. But going back to the second one, and that is, this is for families and relationships, the Campbells fix it. So if you're talking to a younger child and they spill milk, everybody makes mistakes. Everybody spills milk, but you clean it up. You don't look to mom and dad or something. You don't blame somebody else. And other things are going to go wrong. I've made so many mistakes, and not only as a person, but as an entrepreneur, let alone a social entrepreneur. But I fix them, and then I keep going. And those are the 3 things I share. The most important thing I would tell you about work is I've always been passionate about calling. I genuinely, now I know by faith that each of you are created for something. And I think inside of you, most of you probably have a good sense of it, but for those who you don't, there's processes and things that you can do to kind of draw out what you're strong at and what your calling is for God. But I say this to you now, you may not have the total flexibility at all times to do exactly what you want, but the sooner you can decide on what you want and then stay with that. If you want to have genuine contentment and peace beyond a relationship with Christ and resting in the Lord, work where you know you're going to be happy. And when you're younger, you're going to maybe have to dance and not literally be in that place to some extent. But just stay. I would really encourage you to stay on that path no matter what, because that's where you're going to be the most fulfilling. And like I said, if you ever get a chance to meet a friend, just to see the fulfillment and contentment that they have. Because most social workers don't change things. They're doing good work and it's challenging. But there you get to not only change things, but it's meaningful and fulfilling.
Dunk, I think our time is about out. Is there any last things that you want to say or that you wish I would have asked?
No, you're pretty good. The main thing when I do something like this is do a Q&A, and you're all welcome. Sheldon will say it again to come up if you have questions, and I think we're going to be available at 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Too, because you might have questions, and especially about friends. I didn't talk about how we select the children or what do we look for in the friends, but I will mention one thing about the friends. All of the friends they're very diverse, ethnically, gender, everything. But they all have the gift of being with children. So that's the number 1 criteria. And the other criteria, by the way, we'll talk later if you want, is a college graduate. We started out, you didn't have to be a college graduate. And the thing is I'll use myself as an example. If you have a college education, you value education. If you don't have a college education, you don't value it as much. Then put a big asterisk by that. But let me just speak for myself. I mean, I in so many ways, I grew up, I considered myself street smart, and I was so naive. I had so much to learn. I talked about law school and hating it. But I'm so thankful that I went to law school. It taught me how to think. And this doesn't apply to you as much anymore, but I got through school by memorizing things. And I never learned how to think or write until I was in my early 20s. And So I would leave those thoughts with you. The major one, and I just was talking to one of the graduates from Friends who was in a challenging situation, and we were texting this morning. And as you go through life, I just encourage you to be spirited and alive. And when you run into challenges, and everybody's going to, is just rest in the Lord. There's no other answer, and to trust in the Lord. And I'll leave you with if you ever have challenges with that idea of trusting totally in the Lord, there's a great book by Brennan Manning called Ruthless Trust that I would recommend to anybody of all ages.
He recommended that book to me, and as a good friend, I read it, and yeah, it was excellent. Thanks, Dunk, for being here. I love you. Yeah, you bet.
I love you too.